gotta be honest with you, going out week after week, wheeling Loki as hard as we do, comes at a cost. You're gonna break parts and you're gonna wear things out. It is just a part of off-roading. Today, we have several issues going on and they all take place on the driver's side. The CV seal is slinging oil everywhere and the driver's side wheel bearing is beginning to go out. Today, my boy Matt is here to give me a hand in fixing these issues, so let's start tearing into Loki. We should probably start with how I know I have these two issues. The CV seal is the easy one, as there's oil leaking out of the differential housing where the CV shaft actually inserts into it. On top of that, that oil is being slung everywhere, all over the bottom side of the truck. It also has a horrible smell. It's a very pungent gear oil. So that one's easy to know that that's a problem. The wheel bearing is fairly simple to diagnose. I've been hearing a chirping sound. You may hear a grinding noise. There's several different noises that can happen with a wheel bearing. Like I said, I have the chirping, but the easy way to tell is you jack the vehicle up, you grab the tire on the top and bottom, and there should be no play up and down. And I have play. You may not be able to see it, but you can hear it, and I can feel it wiggling back and forth. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the tire off and we're going to get all the way down to the CV shaft and start pulling that out. So after you get your caliper hung up out of the way, you can remove your rotor and toss that off to the side. This is the wheel hub. This is what the tire actually mounts to. Behind it is the wheel bearing. Now the bearing is actually pressed onto the backside of the hub. It is a intimate mechanical fitment. You can replace just the bearing, but oftentimes you have to use a special tool and sometimes you have to do a little bit of cutting. And to press a new bearing onto your hub, it's just a little bit outside of my means. So I've gone ahead and bought an aftermarket one that is an entire assembly all put together. So you have your hub already pressed on as a new bearing, and all you have to do is take off these 4 bolts and put on these new 4 bolts and that whole assembly, and that's all you got to do. It's a done deal after that. Now we got to get this dust cap off. So I think my culprit is possibly this dust cap. You can see I've got a pretty good dent in here. This is supposed to seal out dirt and moisture, and there is moisture inside the cap. So I've probably been getting water in there. It's probably intruding in the bearing, and especially going out and doing stuff like rich loam, I need to be sure that I am protecting my parts as well as possible. So I probably need to replace this. I'll probably pick it up and replace it after the fact of today, but that might be why my bearing is going bad. After removing the dust cap, you've got to remove this cotter pin and this special keeper. Then you break this nut off. You've got to pin something in here between the studs just to be able to break this off, and most likely you have to buy a specialty socket for this. It's quite large. So next we'll remove the hub and bearing assembly by taking out these 4 bolts. The weird thing here is that these bolts will not be able to come all the way out because they're going to be pinned by the hub, but they'll be able to be removed enough to take the whole assembly off. And yeah, look at that. That's looking rough.
You can see this little gasket here is supposed to help keep some of that water and sand in, and it is just, or out, and it is just coated in sand and grime. So that's probably what's led to my failure here. We're gonna start getting the new hub and bearing assembly on. The thing we need to do here is just try to clean this out as much as possible, being careful of the ABS sensor. We're not going to use any parts cleaner because there is a rubber gasket back here, and parts cleaner is not the greatest for rubber parts. So we're just going to get in there, just kind of wipe it clean. Mine is fairly clean. There's some raised rust here and this mating surface. I'm gonna clean that up just a hair here with some sandpaper, just to make sure everything is nice and smooth and has a flush mating surface, because we're trying to make this as watertight as possible, and it's just a metal on metal contact surface. And that there is feeling decent. Next, I'm going to put a little bit of copper anti-seize on the mating surface here. This is going to help that metal on metal contact surface from eventually rusting and seizing together. Now that we've got our area prepped and ready to receive the new wheel hub and bearing assembly, the new one doesn't have its gasket down here. It comes with it, but I'm going to use a little bit of my super lube that I use for my upper A-arms. It's a silicone grease. I'm gonna grease this gasket up a little bit and get it on there to help make a nice positive seal on there. Gotta get that nice and well coated. Get that down and around, make sure it's nice and seated. That's looking good there. We've got our copper anti-seize all the way up on the spindle there. I'm gonna also add a little bit on the front side of the backing plate, because this is gonna be between the two pieces. Okay, that's looking good. So then we can go ahead and get that mounted up. Grab our wheel and bearing hub assembly. Slide those all on together. And start threading them in. These are kind of a pain to get done because you just got to be back here doing this. There is a torque spec for these, but there's no point in even bothering with it, seeing as how you can't get a torque wrench on this. So we're just going to make sure it is very snug and tight. All right, next up, gotta get them nuts tight. So we'll torque everything afterwards. And now we can pull the whole thing out, pull the CV shaft out of the spindle assembly, and swing this over to the front. Just like so. We can now freely get to the CV shaft. There we go. There's a circular C-clip that rides in a groove that you gotta get past. Woo! There it is. And that's got a good amount of dirt and mud in there. So I have a feeling as to what ruins the seal is packing so much dirt and mud in there that it forces this dust ring out, and it gets in there, and it's just so much that it starts to knock that seal. I can't really show you how the seal works. The seal just sits inside of the cylinder of the differential, and it has a certain depth that it has to sit, but there's no positive stop anywhere. It just sits there, and it's amazing that that is the only piece that holds all the fluid in. It definitely looks like that's what it is. So I'm pretty sure in certain mud holes where you get super sludgy and bogged down, like the weekend I was out with Matt and Ryan, and getting yanked out of that mud hole that I should have never gone into, that might have been when this issue occurred. But you see how much mud is just packed up against it. All this mud eventually just works its way in and ruins the surface of this seal. So this seal just rides inside of the cylinder of the differential, and it stops at a certain depth. And it's amazing that this is the only thing keeping all the fluid in, and the CV shaft is just spinning inside this hole here. So we'll need to remove this. This is what we're replacing. This is what's leaking. But I'm pretty sure packing it full of mud is what's causing my issue. So it's not really the greatest method. If you're pulling this CV shaft out, or the CV seal here, you really want to be careful not to mar or nick the inside machine surface of the differential housing. But you kind of want to pry this out. You can just kind of slip inside and just grab the very, very edge of the seal and press against the other one, and just kind of work it out. Being very careful not to slip inside. There it is, to the rest of the housing here. This machined surface, you want to be very careful of nicking that. This here is the seal. The last time I put it in, I used a little bit of RTV. Definitely worked out good, as it held up a lot longer than it did in most cases. You don't have to. You can get it in there without it. But I'm probably going to RTV the next one as well. And now there's a certain depth to insert this into the differential housing there, and it is 5.5 millimeters. And like I said, last time I used RTV to be sure it made a nice seal, and I'm going to do that again today, just because I think it did a lot better than the first and second time I attempted replacing this part here. Nice light coating. Go ahead and start that by hand. And then I have a cut piece of PVC that fits around this to help install it, because you want to press on the outer edge as much as possible. And I'm typically able to push these. And you want to try to get this as square as possible. Just for another little layer of sealant and lubrication, I'm going to apply a very thin amount of silicone grease here to where the seal is going to ride. Yep. There you go.
Yep, there you go. All right. Lock those two pieces there. Set up a 78 to 57. Stabilize and make it sound good. Okay. Yep.
Shortly after getting the CV axle reinstalled and the front suspension components put back together and torqued down, Matt had to take off to his wife and kids for the night. It was a great help having him here, especially to get that CV axle out and back in. It's just such a weird part being double jointed the way it is. It makes it 10 times easier having two sets of hands to help manipulate that part. So thank you to him, and hopefully now that these two parts are replaced, Loki is good to go for the future adventures to come. I am a strong believer in repairing your own vehicle and doing your own maintenance. I feel like one of the worst things you can have happen is be somewhere in the woods and having a great time, have something break and have no knowledge of how to at least navigate your vehicle and get it back to an operable condition so you can get out of the woods and get home safely. If you'd like to learn about ways to help support the channel and fuel the adventure, you can check us out at sunshinestatevikings.com. You have a great week, and we'll catch you on the next one.